For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss whether constitutionalism is at odds with majority rule. Welcome.
Thank you.
You were one of those who struggled for a one person, one vote or majority rule. The SACP and the ANC are arguing that there are attempts to frustrate the majority through resort to liberal constitutionalism. Is this valid?
Yes, you know, it's interesting. There's a lot of attacks on the Constitutional Court and on Chapter 9 institutions, particularly the Public Protector. And I think these are based on a lack of respect for constitutionalism. Now, I myself come from a background where I was not really very much in favor of negotiations when they started. So that I think there's a residual sense amongst some of the people like the SACP where they don't really, they were not really very interested in constitution making, and they haven't understood the difference between a technical rule and a rule that is part of what some of the judges have called transformatory constitutionalism. Now, when a court is asked to rule on whether there's been a violation of the Constitution, in general, they do this in relation to the spirit of the Constitution, which can be seen in the Bill of Rights, which enjoins the courts, Parliament, the executive, everyone, to carry out what are in fact liberatory, emancipatory type goals, to provide for human dignity, to provide for decent education, health care, work opportunities, a range of things that are part of the ANC 1994 slogan, a better life for all. So when someone flouts a regulation, it ought not to be for a purely technical reason, because there are good reasons sometimes to say, okay, there was a flaw here, but the basic spirit of the Constitution is being carried out. We will not force them to do this, that, and the other because of their technicality. But in general, when the courts have held something to be invalid or compelled government to not to evict people when there's not alternative housing, or to supply antiretrovirals, these have been broad humanistic objectives, which are constitutional objectives. Now, when you say that it's anti-majoritarian liberal constitutionalism, or that there are attempts at regime change, really that is, well, it's not only nonsense, but it's failing to understand that constitutional government is not satisfied purely by the majority electing a government. Now, when I first read someone saying that majority rule is not democracy, constitutional democracy, I reacted against it, because like others who were involved in the period prior to 1994, there were a lot of attempts to ward off majority rule, to have group privileges and a whole lot of other mechanisms to undermine it. So majority rule was very important. Having the vote for the first time was very important. However, merely voting as the majority or doing things representing the majority party who's elected by the majority of the people does not make something constitutional in itself. It may well be that what you do is constitutional, but it has to be a combination of representing the majority and acting in accordance with a transformatory constitution. The constitution itself is transformatory, and in order to ensure that that goal is realized, courts and the public protector are empowered to hold them to account.
If one places so much weight on conforming to procedures, can this not, in fact, despite these good intentions, place brakes on transformation?
You see, it's very important that courts don't interfere unnecessarily, and you'll see very often courts refuse to intervene in some matters because, as I indicated, sometimes technicalities are not going to make a big difference, but also sometimes they don't want to become too politicized. They don't want themselves to substitute a decision for that of political parties in Parliament or the executive. They're very careful to phrase what they do in a way that is legal and constitutional, and that even if they do get involved, they must be doing so within a rationale that is one which is supposed to be shared by all.
Is it not still a problem that judges are unelected? Should they not be very careful about coming into conflict with those that are elected?
I think this is a very important question, and I don't think that I've never read an adequate explanation as to why unelected officials ought to have the power to strike down laws and things like that. Now, the way I understand it is not because judges have got this unique capacity to be impartial that no one else has. There are people living like all of us in this surroundings. But I think there's a decision that was made that in order to make constitutional democracy work, you needed to have a professional autonomy allowed to the judiciary. And the judiciary, in consequence, is expected to operate in a manner that is not party political partisan or is not prejudiced. I don't think that they are born with those qualities or that they are the only ones with those qualities. But once you are on the bench, you are expected to behave in a manner that is different from a partisan political party. Someone once said to me about the Nationalist Party government is that they used to appoint judges as party political appointments. But sometimes the judges convinced themselves that they were appointed on merit. And then they started to behave in a way that was not exactly as a political appointment. And there were, under apartheid, sometimes decisions that defended the liberty of people. So I think we need to try to unpack the notion of professionalism and the autonomy of certain institutions like the public protector and the judiciary. That would be the lines along which I would operate to defend this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about constitutionalism in South Africa.